nice book. It is called The Origin of Power Penguin by Ryan C. Powell. This is a Patreon. They wanted me to read one of their books. And this is a Patreon of a long time, and so I was like, sure, I'll read a book. I have no previous exposure to this, but there is a back. Let's see what this back says. It is bred for combat, living in peace, but war is spreading. Subject 3623 is a genetically engineered penguin super soldier who is designed for combat. When war comes to her home, she is unexpectedly thrust into a global conflict. Irradiated by nuclear energy, she becomes Power Penguin. Now she must fight, not only for herself, but for her squad, and for the fate of the world. So that's what this book is about. It says in the back, hello, glad you guys can join me. Hello, Jonathan. Hello, Michael. Glad to see you here. I'm about to read this based off of what I read off of the back. Does this book interest you at all? Even if it does, even if it doesn't, I'm about to read it to you. So, of course, this is from 2017. Alright. We got a lot of chapters going on here. A whole lot going on. There's 20 chapters. Should I read the dedications and acknowledgments in the prologue? Usually, whenever I read books, I usually just skip those because I just want to read the story. But it might be important. Dedications and acknowledgments. Okay, I'm gonna read this. Hello, Fior. How you doing today? I'm glad you can join me in my cozy reading stream. Nice and cozy here. First off, I want to thank the wonderful furry fandom. You want to know why I wanted to read this? This is a fun dedication and acknowledgement. Although I had loved talking cartoon animals all of my life, I had no idea that this fandom existed until I attended college. The creativity and imagination of furries remained unmatched by any other group I've known. Without the furry fandom, this novel might just feature boring, ugly humans. A genetically modified human. Not as cool as a genetically modified penguin. Why does a penguin need to be genetically modified? Like, the only situation I could think of is maybe the penguin is going to Antarctica or like ice planets or something, and we need a penguin, and it goes underwater. Hello, Conway. Like this, live long and prosper. Oh my goodness! I just watched the Star Trek episode, the first time where they do the live long and prosper thing. I was like, oh my goodness! This is the first appearance of the live long and prosper. It was great. Let's go back to this book though. Whether it's been my own webcomics, Double Trouble, fursuiting as Jinx the Lynx, I'm guessing that's a lynx, or just browsing for affinity, the furry fandom has made life much more enjoyable and fluffy. What about e621.net? What? You're missing the best furry site in this dedication and acknowledgments. An especially big thank you goes out to one of my lifelong heroes, George Lucas. Star Wars has consumed my life, and I think you should stop watching Disney Star Wars. It's consumed my life and has played such a big influence in countless ways. As my favorite movie series, it, like the furry fandom, has made life so interesting that I can't possibly imagine life without it. One man with a crazy dream can achieve the impossible sometimes. Well, I'm a person who can imagine life without Star Wars. Well, actually, only the Disney ones. I can't imagine life without the other Star Wars, 1 through 6. Those Star Wars. I can't imagine life without that. I'm Gengar. Hello, casual nerd. Oh my goodness, Daniels! Oh wow, someone I've heard of. I've been scrolling through YouTube live channels. It's mostly black people rapping along to music that's blowing out the mic. Well, glad to see you here, Daniels. How are you doing? I'm still going through the dedication acknowledgments. There seems to be a few pages, so I'm just gonna continue reading. And once I finish reading this, then I'll check back in with chat. Another person I would like to thank is my friend Matt, Professor Dumbluck Christie. Not only has he been a great friend, but without him, AnthroCon and a couple of My Little Pony conventions wouldn't have been quite as fun. I also would like to thank Eric Space Wolf Omega Alexander for being a friend and inspiration for many years now. One of the first people I met online after being properly introduced to the furry fandom, Space Wolf Omega has entertained me not only with his webcomic Bats in the Belfry, but also with his Friskella and Kurzina novels. And then there's Power Penguin. Power Penguin has been a part of my life for many, many years now. Ever since November 1999, back when I was in 5th grade. I wasn't born yet in November 1999. Back when I was in 5th grade, and I made a couple of crude drawings of an atomic-powered penguin superhero, my life would never be the same. Starting in 2003, I decided to try and turn Power Penguin from an adolescent comic into a novel. Progress was painfully slow and seemed to stop for years at a time. Still, Power Penguin never left my mind. Drawings, writings, plans, and world building consumed a part of my brain. Another serious attempt at writing the novel came in 2010. Finally, in 2014, I would redouble my efforts to try to make Power Penguin come alive on the page once and for all. After changing his sex from male to female, making her a mute, and completely revamping the world Power Penguin lived in, the writing process started again. Things seemed to be finally falling into place as the world of Georth was being created. Once and for all, Power Penguin would escape the confines of my mind and would come to life on a printed page. And that was the end of the acknowledgments. Now I'm at the prologue. Whew! Hello. Glad you could stop by, Daniels. Hello, Jax Flopped. Casual Nerd. You know, Gengar is pretty cool. I would want a genetically modified Gengar. Honestly, did the screened-in room turned out okay? Mint? Did the screened-in room? Yeah. I guess if you mean mesh that's right now. Yeah, it turned out well. It's keeping the bugs out. If there was no mesh whatsoever, I think there'd be like at least so many more bugs in here. But now, it's not. Which is nice. Yes, the mesh adventure. I'm now in the mesh. I'm glad you asked. Thank you, C-Dub. There's the prologue, sorry. This is about how big the prologue is, and then there's chapter 1. So let's continue. Prologue. The past 23 years on planet Georth has been a time of uneasy peace and rising political tensions. Since the end of World War IV in the year 14,562, the Cold War has occurred. 2 years after the war ended, the nations of the Meshchek Empire, Tychos, and Rolandia formed an agreement and started what became known as the Confederate Alliance. This alliance was formed as a counter to the worldwide political power of the Assembly of Nations, commonly known as the Free Republics. Meshchek, a massive nation long known for its industrial and military prowess, had suffered greatly during the Sixth World War. Oh, I read that wrong. It's not the end of the World War IV. It's the end of World War VI. There's six conflicts they had to involve the world in. Yeah, I can see why I have an atomic penguin because you guys can't stop fighting in this world. Meshchek, a massive nation long known for its industrial and military prowess, has suffered greatly during the Sixth World War. Millions dead, destabilized industry, and a horrific economic depression had only worsened the matter. When they could not get adequate help from the Free Republic nations, they turned to their ally, Tychos, a frigid manufacturing superpower located not far from the North Pole. The bleak and heavily polluted country was known for producing virtually all of the industrial goods to be found in the world, from toys to cars to aircraft carriers. Before this North Pole just reminded me of a fun fact. Did you know? I don't know if you know this very fun fact, but you know that 85% of the Earth's history has been not in an ice age, but in a greenhouse effect. The only difference between an ice age and a greenhouse is whether the poles have ice on them. So currently we're in an ice age because the poles have ice on them. But like when the dinosaurs lived, there was just no ice on the poles. Just fun fact. So I don't know why I thought of that whenever I just read North Pole. I guess part of me was like, oh, it's probably warm. The North Pole has to be warm. Why would there be a base up there otherwise? Maybe this base needs a lot of cooling power. In that case, then the ice, the North Pole is being melted because it needs to be cooled down. Whatever this is. Where was I at? Rolandia, a troublesome nation, seemingly always at war with its neighbor Jeswinia, has been the third member to join this new Confederate alliance. It too had suffered in the war. With many of its cities bombed to rubble by Jeswinia and others, it had sought help in reconstruction, only to find that no one wanted to help such a belligerent nation on the other side of the conflict. The industrial might of Tychos stepped in to help rebuild the ravaged nation. Soon enough, the Meshchek Empire bounced back, thanks to a seemingly miraculous economic recovery, the causes of which are still debated to this day. In 14,566, the newly crowned King Barathos IV declared his intentions to join this nation of Siniola to the Confederate Alliance. Over 4 centuries earlier, the Golden Empire of Sin had collapsed, and a civil war had split the nation into Sin and Siniola. Young Barathos, full of national pride and visions of glory, had wanted to reclaim Sin and bring the two nations back together under his banner. His people had adopted the idea, and nationalist sentiments quickly spread across the nation like wildfire. The citizens were eager to see themselves return to the once great glory days of the Golden Empire. More nations followed suit. Denan and Mikulova? What? Miculboa. Miculboa? Two tropical nations sporting large navies had joined a few years after Sinolia. Farsnaj, an equatorial country of jungles and mountains, joined, as did neighboring Fajd, a land made of a mixture of deserts, mountains, and coastal jungles. Behind these was Welshire, another nation whose history was marked with war, terrorism, and bloodshed. Finally, in 14,571, Golmonia joined up with the alliance. This large, arid land of plains, mountains, and often warring tribes fit in with the other allied nations. These 10 countries now formed a worldwide power of their own. The Free Republic nations, the bastions of freedom and democracy in the world, have been unable or unwilling to stem the rising tide of the Confederate movement. The Free Republic nations stood for, in word if not only, The Free Republic nation stood for, in word if not always in deed, representative democracy. personal freedoms, and free market capitalism. The Confederate nations, on the other hand, believed in heavy-handed state control over the masses. They put the well-being of the collective ahead of that of the individual. They restricted freedom of speech, the right to assemble, representative government, personal freedoms, and economic freedom. The Confederate governments kept a tight rein over their economies. Many people had tried unsuccessfully to flee the Confederate nations, only to wind up missing, jailed, or worse. What's worse? Almost done with the prologue. In clear violation of the peace treaties of 14,562, the nation of the Confederate alliance began to rearm in secret, supplied mainly by the industrial might of Ataichos and Meschek. Their armies and navies soon began to swell with newly constructed military vehicles and weaponry. Although a tense peace was maintained over the years, the Free Republic nations viewed the Confederate nations as a growing threat. Although many politicians and citizens had spoken out about looming dangers on the horizon, their cries seemingly went unheeded. For a while, it seemed like the Confederate alliance was simply another part of life that had to be dealt with in the new post-war world. In the years after 14,580, international relationships grew more tense between the Free Republic and Confederate nations. Finally, they reached a boiling point and conflict seemed inevitable. Not long after the new year of 14,585, planet Geoearth would no longer experience peace. That was the end of the prologue. What'd you think of that? Yeah, are you bringing back Mint Salad Reads? Justin will dig that costume. Michelob Ultra. Yes, I am bringing back Mint Salad Reads. Steven, how you doing? How are you doing? Reading gets me, dehydrated. So make sure you hydrate yourself. Alright. So just finished the prologue, and I finished the, what is it called? The acknowledgements section. Chapter 1, World War VII. There's a seventh conflict in this world. Oh, wow. Stop having conflicts. Just become Star Trek and start going all over the stars. Jeez. It was just before dawn when the massive steel leviathans gathered together off the eastern coast of Morgania. The sun had not yet risen, but the sky was already transforming from black to a shade of reddish purple. It looked like it would be a beautiful spring day. A Confederate alliance flotilla had secretly sailed from naval yards in Tychos down south to the Morganian coastline. On the bridge of the dreadnought flagship CAS Vanquisher, Captain Vindas looked back at Grand Admiral Unari. Both of them were Crotusians, anthropomorphic, hyena-like beings. Captain Vindas scratched at the short fur under her chin. Standing and sitting around her were various other Crotusians, Cattans, and Norvegians. The Cattans, a lemur-like race, and Norvegians, rats-like people, were busy about their control consoles and their glowing buttons. Captain Rachel Vindas had served most of her life in the Tychos Navy. She had worked her way up from recruit to gunnery officer to captain of her own frigate, the Mauler. She had been far too young to serve in World War VI, but she had been brought up on stories of heroism and grand deeds performed for the service of her nation. That made her proud and instilled in her the desire to become a hero herself. For the past 2 years, She had been captain of the Vanquisher. She loved this dreadnought and considered it her home. Over 800 feet of armor and guns, the Vanquisher was a sight to behold. Two massive gun turrets, each sporting 3 huge guns, sat both before and behind the superstructure. The 12 guns, each with a caliber of 15 inches, could waylay to their targets at very long range. Numerous supporting 5-inch gun turrets lined the superstructure, and anti-aircraft guns were plentiful. Beautiful red-orange wood planking covered the deck and the heavy armor underneath. Two tall lattice cage masts towered above the ship. Over 2,000 sailors living aboard this dreadnought were under her command. As a Croatian woman, Captain Vindos had her brown and black spotted fur shaven down. Her gray skin was visible underneath the stubble. She wore a bluish-gray naval uniform that fit her perfectly. It neither hid her body curves nor accentuated them. Above her left breast, her rank insignia sat. On the outsides of her legs, the bottom of her skirt, and atop her shoulders, light green stripes denoted which naval squadrons she was a part of. She wore her captain's hat above and between her ears. Her heavy black boots were expertly shined. She was in her mid-30s, quite attractive, but unmarried. She had dedicated her life to the Navy. A husband would have only distracted her from that, and the very thought of younglings disgusted her. I'm with you there. She always smiled when she was in her uniform and in command of her ship. She smiled because of what she knew was about to happen. She knew what she was about to do. The Confederate Alliance's official declaration of war wouldn't be delivered until after the first wave of initial attacks were successful. It was strange, she thought, that there seemed to be no defensive measures around the port. Their plan of deception had worked perfectly. Using fake transponder codes used by commercial shipping vessels, they had bluffed their way to within only a few miles of the normally heavily guarded naval base. Any radar or radio operators would have assumed that these warships were in fact ordinary civilian cargo ships. The plan was ambitious and it worked flawlessly. Oh mwah. Oh mwah. Beautiful. The Vanquisher's starboard sat blah 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 words. The Vanquisher's starboard side sat parallel to the coast, which lay only a short distance away. Just beyond the beach, the Free Republic naval base and accompanying city of Vintron stood. Its light lit up the night sky for miles around with an orange glow. The CAS Crusader, the flotilla's massive aircraft carrier, sat with its bow facing the wind. Its rectangular flight deck was abuzz with dozens of fighter planes ready to take off the moment the announcement came. The control island, located in the middle of the ship's 1,000-foot length, just to the starboard side of the flight deck, was full of activity and preparation. 4 twin-barreled 5-inch gun turrets guarded the control island. The pre-dawn air outside was crisp and cool, though it was quite warm compared to the normal air of frozen Tychos. Alright, we're on a chill place. We're in position, Grand Admiral! Oh wait, this is somebody talking. I should probably have a voice. We're in position, Grand Admiral! The captain announced. That should not be the captain's voice. It's a chick! The chick. The captain is a chick, so what should her voice be? We're in position, Grand Admiral! That works. The captain announced. From what information she had gleaned from her dossier, Grand Admiral Margaret Unari was about 2 decades older than her and had served in World War VI. She had been severely wounded when her ship's bridge was hit at the Battle of Funagiri. It took her several years to regrow all of her missing body parts, but her mind had stayed intact, and she continued to give strategy from her hospital bed as a quadriplegic amputee. Whew! Okay. Very good, Captain. Oh wait, these are two people. They need to have two different distinct voices. They're both chicks? What? Are we in, what type of world are we in where we have a female captain and a female grand admiral? Admiral. I just think this must be like a matriarchy society that this takes place in, not gonna lie. If this was like anywhere, I personally don't believe that there will be a female captain and a female grand admiral on the same ship at the same time. But that's just me. That's just me being a misogynist. But more importantly, though, I gotta have different voices. So the first captain's voice is, "We're in position, Grand Admiral." And then the second voice is, "Very good, Captain." Very good, Captain. Actually, I need different voices for the first one. "We're in position, Grand Admiral." And "Very good, Captain." Okay. Now I got the voices down. Grand Admiral Yunari replied. She too was dressed in a well-fitting naval uniform, though hers was dark blue with gold stripes. Her brown fur was shaven down as yet well. This was the style not just of the military, but of women the world over for millennia. "You may begin the exercises now." Exercises? That's what the Grand Admiral was calling this. This was no mere excursion. This was war. After 23 years of fragile peace, Captain Vindos was about to fire the first shots in anger. She would be responsible for starting World War VII. She took a deep breath through her nostrils, careful that no one else on the bridge noticed it. Straightening the collar of her blue-gray uniform, she stepped forward to the ship's telephone system. Pressing the correct buttons, she was transferred to the gunnery stations. "Firing controls!" I'm trying to do a Yaira voice for Captain Vindos. That's the idea. Definitely the coolest neighbor on the block. Thank you, Floy. You're nice. I only in the regards that I'm currently in shade, and all the other porches, they're facing the sun. That's the only regard in which I'm the coolest neighbor. Thank you. Okay, I continue. Firing controls? Fuck, how do I do this? I gotta get into the voice. It was meant to be a death blow. Firing controls. This is Captain Vindas. There you go. I got the right voice. She paused ever so slightly before continuing. She wanted to savor these words. "You may commence firing." The gunners on the mighty dreadnought had already loaded and aimed the ship's 12 massive cannons towards the still sleeping base. As soon as the last syllable exited the captain's lips, the dreadnought's guns fired simultaneously. Colossal fumes of fire spat out, and the air was ripped apart with a deafening roar. Bright orange fireballs from the impacts lit up the pre-dawn sky and illuminated the area around them. The explosions tore apart buildings and cast up terrific displays of fire and debris. As soon as the first volley from the Vanquisher was fired, the escort ships opened fire as well. The 700-long destroyers Scimitar and Longsword followed the dreadnought's lead. The 3 triple turrets situated ahead of the superstructure roared on each ship. The middle super-firing turret sat higher than the turrets fore and aft of it. A pair of battle cruisers, the Tiger and the Morban, each armed with 12 8-inch caliber guns mounted in 3 twin turrets standing ahead and behind the superstructure, opened fire as well. The nearly 600 long warships were less heavily armed and The nearly 600 long warships were less heavily armed and armored than dreadnoughts and destroyers, but they made up for it with their increased speed and lesser cost. More of the naval base was destroyed in an instant. Flaming rubble rained down on the ground, crushing vehicles and any people unfortunate enough to be awake at that hour. I feel sorry for the poor bastard who has to clean that slag up, someone nearby remarked. About half a minute after the first shots, the Vanquisher fired again. Its 4 turrets belched fire like a creature out of legend. Captain Vindas looked at Grand Admiral Yunari. Her shorn tail was wagging. She was enjoying the show. The peace was over now. This was officially war. Oh, this is the Grand Admiral now. I'm trying to think. Oh, wait, where is that? The God of War is smiling down on us, Captain, the Grand Admiral said with a smirk. Yes, it is, Grand Admiral, the captain said. Oh, fucking, what is this name? Hold on. Hello, Billy Keys. Bill Keys, is that a green screen? This is not a green screen. I am, in fact, outside of my porch. I got a mesh behind me. That's what I got going on. This name! I stopped because this name. What is this name? Alvank Karglibin. Okay, let me. How do I pronounce this? It's ALVENK_KARGILBIN. What is this name? Alvank Karglibin. Alvank Karglibin was indeed smiling upon them this morning. After several more volleys from the ships, Captain Vindas reached for the telephone again. Crusader, you may launch when you're ready. Vindas looked out the window at the naval port off the starboard side of the ship. Massive fires raged across many buildings. Chaos engulfed a now awake base. Copy that, Captain Vindas, came the reply from the carrier's captain. Signal lights were flashed and flags were waved. The first fighter flew off the Crusader's flight deck and headed towards the flaming military base. Another fighter was followed by another until the deck was cleared. The leading JRY Viper fighter plane flew quickly through the air thanks to its powerful pusher propeller. The Vipers had swept back wings on the rear half of the fuselage. Conical noses that cut through the air, forward situated canards on the side of the nose, and vertical stabilizers near the wings. Its dark green and gray color scheme looked black against the still dark sky. Forming up a squad in midair, 5 Vipers swooped and dived towards the outskirts of Vintron's ports. They started to strafe the ships anchored in the harbor. There wasn't anything else like the precision killing of a fighter plane. Bright yellow tracer fire and rockets streamed down from the fighters to impact the commercial cargo ships below. The destroyers each continued to fire additional volleys at the naval base, as did the dreadnought. The warships berthed in the harbor were quickly set alight by the powerful explosions. Now awakened, sailors tried to perform damage control to save their ships. Very few had the place of mind to try and fire back at the attacking flotilla. Vintron's civilian harbor was savaged by the Vipers. Tall plumes of water shot up from the impact of machine gun bullets and explosions. The attack continued unabated. Vindas and Unari could see it from the window. Grand Admiral Unari laid a hand on Captain Vindas's shoulder. The god of war is truly smiling down upon us. Praise to be him. Praise to be him, the captain repeated with a smile. Captain Rachel Vindas. Her name would be undoubtedly go down in history for officially firing the first shots of the war. Inside, she thought about this. She would come praised as a hero for countless generations to come. Just curious. Just curious. We all know who started World War I, but who started World War II? Who is the first shot of World War II? That's what I'm thinking. Pokemon can have autism? I thought it was strictly a human thing. Yes. It's by default, I guess. Actually, it's by default that Pokemon have autism. I'm glad I could teach you some knowledge. Oh boy, how long is this? How long do I have in this? Okay, I have about 10 more pages in this chapter. That's fun. This is a fun read. Are you enjoying this book? What do you think of this book so far? Are you able to visualize what's happening? Well, I guess with me, I read the words, and I can kind of visualize what's happening, but, like, it'd be easier for me to visualize what's happening if I was listening to this versus reading it, I guess. What do you think of that? What are you thinking of the story so far? Alright. Where was I? Okay. This is Squadron Leader Marvik. We're going in, said a young Catan from within the cockpit of his Viper fighter. Flying low over the countryside of Sin, the lemur-like anthro adjusted his throttle control. A male, his fur was longer than that of the shaven females. A black mask of fur around his muzzle and eyes stood in contrast to the white fur on the rest of his face. High contrast yellow goggles that aided in visibility were placed over his eyes, and a decorated flight helmet covered most of its head. He, like the others in the Confederate Air Forces, wore a dark gray jumpsuit over his furry body. His long black and white ringed tail sat below his bottom, and an ass canyon formed between the seat cushion. Many chairs and seats were designed like this, aircraft cockpit seats being no exception. The sides of the nose of his fighter were decorated with the painted images of a scantily clad female Catan. Roger, Squadron Leader, came the chorus of replies from the Sinolian pilots. Dennis Marvik had always loved flying. Ever since he was a youngling and his grandfather took him up in his old crop duster, he had loved it. It was akin to a religious experience for him. He had never passed up an opportunity to go up in an airplane. As a youngin', he had always admired fighter aces from wars past. He read all he could about them and watched all the movies and documentaries he could. As he grew older, he became a crop duster pilot himself. Once he became an adult at the age of 16, he was conscripted into the Sinolian military machine. His flight talents were squandered, however, as he was relegated to flying simple patrol patterns around the northeastern coast of Sinolia on the lookout for the ships of pirates and smugglers. Strafing criminal boats wasn't what he had signed up for. Thankfully, He was transferred to the western border with Sin. As international tensions began to ratchet up, he and his flight squadron began to see more and more drills. He anticipated the day when he'd finally be set loose in an actual aerial duel. Today, the dream would finally come true. The Vipers zipped under the low, dark cloud layer. They saw the lights of houses in the peaceful countryside of Sin. It was already night on this side of the world. In real time, it was only minutes since the start of the other attacks. The Vipers raced low over the sleeping countryside, staying in formation like a flock of dactyls. The Vipers swept in from the east and were heading across the country towards the Free Republic air base of Sybils. Before too long, they could see their target silhouetted at the horizon. Word of the attacks elsewhere likely wouldn't have gone to the sleeping base yet, so their defenses would be down. Staying low near the ground meant that the facility wouldn't pick up the approaching aircraft on radar. Within minutes, the squadron was overhead of Syblis. It's actually Syblis, oops. "Y'all know what to do," said the squadron leader. "Good hunting." The airplanes swept up in arcs high above Syblis and began their attack. The pair of Vipers, coming down at a steep angle, targeted an anti-craft battery below them. Unleashing the firepower of the 4.50 caliber heavy machine guns hosed in their noses, they showed no mercy. Whew. Alright. World War II in Asia started in 1937 when Japan invaded China. Oh, okay. World War II in Europe started in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Oh, it's good to know. Well, thank you for the knowledge snacks, for the history snacks. Will you do a top 10 or something similar? Yeah, I've thought about it. What would I do a top 10 on, though? Like, do you have any... What would you watch me do a top 10 on? Just curious. What would you watch me, like, rank, like, top 10 candies is what I could think of immediately. Top 10 movies? I think I'd have to watch more movies in order to do that. Oh, once I finish all of Star Trek TOS, I could do top 10 Star Trek TOS episodes and then do that for the other Star Treks. I think it's a good idea. She's a cutie, thank you. Input's funny, hello. Hello. Glad to see you here. Of the movies you've watched in the last year? Yeah, I'll think about it. I'll definitely think about it. I haven't watched any new movies recently. Except for Madam Web. I hope to see more movies, new movies, but I'm currently on a Star Trek journey. But, I'll definitely think about it. I'll have to make more. I haven't made any top 10 lists. I'll have to start making top 10 lists if you're interested in watching that. Where was I at? Let's continue. The first order of attack was to destroy the anti-aircraft weaponry, leaving them defenseless. Marvick and two wingmates dove at a radio communications tower and unleashed several rockets. Fireballs erupted from the base and reached up, trying to engulf the tower completely. Another pair of Vipers performed a strafing run across a series of anti-aircraft gun emplacements. Soon after the attack started, the Syblis forces began to mobilize themselves and prepare to fight back. Many of them scrambled from their sleep to man what anti-aircraft weaponry emplacements remained. Their guns fired back at the attackers, and soon the sky was filled with yellow tracer fire going up and down. Seeing one of their own planes burst into flames and crash, several other Viper pilots turned around to continue strafing the anti-aircraft batteries with vigor. A second wave of Confederate fighters began their approach on the base. Flying higher up, GRG Predator fighter bombers aimed their deadly ordnance. Looking very similar to the JRY Vipers, the Predators possessed a deadly pair of 1.5-inch autocannons, which hung below the wings. Whistling down, a smattering of their bombs hit the airfields and hangar bays, doing significant damage. Any airplanes unlucky enough to be outside of their hangars were shot apart by strafing runs. Any airplanes inside the hangars were targeted by the ordnance and destroyed. The firepower of the .50 caliber machine guns and the 1.5-inch autocannons was devastating. Body parts littered the ground from the soldiers who had been hit. Flames burned uncontrollably. One Predator fired a pair of rockets from its wing-mounted launch tubes at what looked like an administrative office building. Windows blew out and concrete cracked as the rockets impacted and exploded. Squadron leader Marvick tipped his wing and looked out of the cockpit at the flames that were engulfing the base and lighting up the night sky. His flight group continued the strafe and bombed the base into submission. To his left, a pair of Vipers flew in a shallow attack vector as they unleashed bright yellow lines of fire. This is what Marvick had dreamed about since he was a youngling. Finally, he was fighting for his king and his country. Sin would be reclaimed by Sinolia, and things would finally be set right after 4 centuries. Sinolia would be a golden empire once more, and squadron leader Dennis Marvick would be one of the noble aerial knights leading the charge. I'm actually pretty enjoying this. This is too depressing. Your audios? Okay. I'm actually enjoying reading this. Maybe it's the process of reading something out loud that I like. I don't know what the caliber is. I'm not familiar with what gun parts are. So I don't know what is the caliber. What is the caliber? Is the caliber like is what? I don't know. I've heard caliber a lot. So I know it's a gun thing specifically. It's fun to learn. I agree with you. It is fun to learn. It's also fun to read out loud and get better with reading out loud. All I can visualize while reading this is just like planes in the air shooting at each other. That's pretty much about it. It's I like the level of detail. So we got a few more pages within this chapter. And that'll be chapter 2. The grayish-brown Lyran 54 half-tracks rumbled across the mountainous border pass between the nations of Rolandia and Jeswinia. This would be the start of the 8th major modern war between the longtime foes. How do you have so many wars between each other? And it has to be world wars. How? Other YouTubers have read books on air. It's okay. I'm glad you're enjoying. I'm glad you're enjoying this. I'm enjoying reading it. If you know what a caliber is, let me know what that is. What part of the gun is a caliber? Is that like the barrel? Is that like... Is it the whole size of the... Is that the whole size of the gun? Like tiny caliber, big caliber? I don't know, guns. How do you have so many wars? The late afternoon sun was almost ready to set, and 2 of the 3 moons were starting their trek across the sky. The Lyran 54 model was a standard half-track, not too different from the Venvesh 9 model used by the Free Republic armies. Roughly hexagonal when viewed from the front or back, The open-topped vehicle was the hybrid of a truck and a panzer, possessing 2 forward wheels and continuous tracks in the rear. A group of 10 soldiers sat in the back while the 3-man crew of driver, navigator/commander, and gunner maneuvered the vehicle through the large snow-covered rocks in their path. A tall female Croatian, oh my goodness, my phone just didn't okay Google. At some point it did it again. At some point I said some words that sounded like okay, and then I also used the word Google, but I don't want to use the words okay and then also Google in the same sentence, so I don't want to do it again in my phone. But now it just kept, I don't know, it started listening to me at some point. Caliber is barrel size. The German 88 of World War II is 88mm cannon, famous for shooting planes and tanks. Oh, okay, that's good to know. Good to know. So like a 19 caliber. Alright, what's the example? So what would be a .50 caliber then? How big would that be? .50? Like millimeters? I don't know. Where was I? A tall female Croatian with short gray and black striped fur stood up to keep watch from the heavy machine gun mounts situated at the front of the open compartment. Half-tracks were an invaluable, though often unpopular, military weapon. Here, over mountain passes of the Roland-Geschwin border, they demonstrated their superb off-road capabilities. Geschwinia, a name accursed amongst the anthros of Rolandia, has always been a thorn in their side. Geschwinia, the nation that had slaughtered countless younglings in wars, the nation that had plundered the natural resources on the other side of the mountains, the nation that devastated the cities of Rolandia in World War VI, had to pay. It was the duty of every able-bodied Rolandian to fight back against those barbarians. It was a feud going back to King Roland I and King Geschwin II in ancient times. The continent of Gontaland would not be safe until those bastards were wiped off the map. The group of half-tracks continued to drive through the mountain pass. Oh no, the 5 o'clock alarm. Stop that. It's basically the diameter of the gun's barrel. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Alright. Where was I at? Okay. The group of half-tracks continued to drive through the mountain pass before coming to a large cleft in between 2 opposing mountainsides. The lead vehicle slowed to a crawl while the Norvegian commander looked through his binoculars. His pinkish gray, furless hands adjusted the focus while his eyes peered keenly towards his target, the border fort of Blankcheck. "This is Major Kruger," he said in an authorian voice. 3.5-inch guns, take point positions, rocket carriers, stand by on secondary positions. From behind the lead half-track, several more half-tracks, these ones armed with deadly, long-range 3.5-inch artillery guns, others carrying about a dozen rockets, drove into position and stopped. The guns were quickly loaded and aimed towards the fort, while the rocket gantries were elevated into position. The major grinned, his front buck teeth showing against the rest of his sharp smile. "Fire!" All at once, the guns sounded like thunder, and the rockets wailed with an almost supernatural roar. The shells hit around Fort Blanktek, causing chaos just moments before the slightly slower rockets began to rain down. Numerous orange fireballs sent deadly shrapnel flying in all directions. Several soldiers stationed near the outer walls were perforated by the shrapnel. Yellow blood and orange-tinted organs splattered about. Major Kruger spoke into his radio transceiver again. 3.5-inch guns and rockets continue to fire. Stormtrooper and shock trooper units move to tertiary positions and prepare to drive on into the force. Stormtroopers and shock troopers. Few words spread fear like these heavily armed soldiers did. The stormtroopers were unique in that, unlike all the other soldiers, they wore experimental bullet-resistant body armor over their torsos, as did the shock troopers. With long, variable zoom scopes mounted atop their Traintor Tech TDI assault rifles, they demonstrated superior accuracy above the normal soldier. They also carried semi-automatic scatterguns, which were deadly at close range. The shock troopers were more heavily armed than the stormtroopers. They used Arvidi, or H-13 general-purpose machine guns, built-in 44T rocket launchers, and FF-830 flamethrowers. While normal soldiers might take an hour to secure a position, stormtroopers and shock troopers claimed to be able to do it in minutes. Whew. Some are English inches and other are metric. Then England talk about 12-pounder guns. England was referring to naval terms of the 1700s. England ruled the waves, so they kept pounder terms in World War II. Okay. I get it. So it's like, we've dominated the world in the past. We're not gonna change how we name things. Fuck you guys. It's pretty much seems like Britain would do that. Oh yeah. Britain did have big navies. Big boy navies. This seems to be, honestly, I think this seems to be Air Force, and now we're dealing with the Army of this world. Well, that's fun. Yay, I got it! Yay, history. I never paid attention in history class, but I'm learning more. I'm learning more from YouTube comment sections than I do remember from history class. So thank you. Give me more history knowledge whenever you can. Let's see, the TDI assault rifle, developed by Trantor Tech Industries, was the main weapon used by Confederate Alliance militaries. Utilizing a bullpup configuration where the banana-shaped magazine was located behind the hand grip and trigger, it was equipped with a selective fire toggle switch and was extremely rugged and reliable. At about 2.5 feet long, it was significantly shorter and lighter than many other military rifles. It fired a .35 caliber intermediate assault rifle round to devastating effect. The Trantor Tech K-21D semi-automatic scattergun had a wooden foregrip underneath its metal barrel. Using detachable 5-round magazines, they had terrific firepower at close range. The RH-13's long, rifle-like medium machine guns with perforated barrel shrouds and attached belts of ammunition could make quick work of the enemy with their devastating fire. The ammunition belts were stored in a rectangular box underneath the weapon's body, or they could be attached to backpacks worn by the user. The Belden 44T rocket launcher differed from the Free Republic H-8 in that the 44T had a rocket that was loaded in the front of the launcher rather than the back. Is there a dog? Yeah, there is. The FF-830 flamethrower was a weapon of terror used mainly by the Confederate forces. With 3 pressurized tanks on a backpack mount, it could launch streams of flaming napalm over 100 feet. The artillery barrage continued on while the rocket-launching half-tracks were reloaded. The 3.5-inch guns could have a sustained rate of fire of 20 to 30 rounds per minute, depending on the skill of the firing team. So about one bullet every 2 seconds or one bullet every 3 seconds. It's not terribly fast. Where was I? God damn it. I lost my place. Rockets, however, took much longer to reload onto their launch gantries. The fort's wall below them was rapidly being destroyed by the guns and rockets. Soon enough, a large hole was visible through the black smoke. Major Kruger saw it through his binoculars. Stormtroopers and shock troopers moving! Oh fuck. Several half-tracks began to move down the mountain trail towards the besieged fort. Guns inside the Gazwinian fort began to fire back at the attackers. The firing was frantic at first, with shells exploding around the half-tracks. But soon enough, one round found its mark. A half-track to the left of Major Kruger's exploded, sending ragged metal? Ragged metal? There's a dog behind me. Hush, dog. What are you doing? What? Alright. What is... Ragid? Maybe. I think it's pronounced Ragid. I lost my place. Yeah, he's sending ragged metal. Ragged. R-A-G-G-E-D. How do you pronounce that? I don't remember. Sending ragged metal and limbs flying. Undeterred, he stayed in position while his own guns and rockets fired back. The half-tracks, filled with squads of stormtroopers and shock troopers, made their way down towards the fort. Their heavy machine guns fired sporadically at the fort, drawing the attention of the fort's heavy guns. While the artillery guns trained on the advancing attackers, they were targeted by the guns still up on the mountainside. In just a few more moments, the heavy guns in the fort were silenced, leaving the soldiers inside with little defense. Kruger's guns stopped firing. The half-tracks drove through the hole in the outer wall. The troopers quickly disembarked out of rear door of the vehicles and took up firing positions. Men and women armed with RH-13 medium machine guns let loose with quick bursts. Two flamethrower-wielding shock troopers fired their horrific weapons. Terrified Gazwinian soldiers immediately fled. The .50 caliber machine guns on the half-tracks continued to provide covering fire for the troopers. The Norvescuan major watched this all happening from his binoculars. He smiled again. Excellent! The Norvescuan major, I already read that. The stormtroopers, utilizing their scoped TDI assault rifles, made quick work of any soldiers they could see. Anyone hiding behind cover was bombarded by grenades or napalm. One unfortunate woman was hit by the flames and suffered an extremely horrific death. Ooh, jeez. The defenders continued to fight, but it was clear to the watchful eyes of Major Kruger that they were losing. One of the flamethrower soldiers moved toward a building and fired a quick stream through an open door. Major Kruger put down his binoculars and turned to his Catan driver. "We can't let the stormtroopers have all the fun now, can we?" He motioned the vehicle forward with his hand. As soon as they saw his half-track moving down, the rest of the group, with the exception of the 3.5-inch guns, followed suit. This was too easy, he thought. Across the world, the forces of the Confederate Alliance went to war. The naval forces of Dinan and Mikuluboa were amassing around the continent of Taiki. They commenced naval bombings of the countries of Galric and Tai. The land armies of the Meschek Empire were mobilized, and they began their pre-dawn marches northward into the lands of the Hohab, Keen, and Deltine. Farjnaj gathered together its jungle armies and began their invasion of Beleth. Golmonia prepared to attack Elthaz and Outfars. The forces of Welshir struck southward into the oil-rich neighbor of Horden. Fajj set out columns of panzers across the desert. World War VII had begun. And that was chapter 1. Alright. What am I reading? Reading this book is the Origins of Power Penguin. So by Ryan C. Powell. So this person in particular, they've been a Patreon for a very long time. They were like, "Oh, I got a book. Can you read this book?" And I was like, "Sure." So, and this is what I'm reading. Ragged. Thank you. Science book on a planet having war using World War II weapons. Yeah, it's interesting. It's I don't know. I can't tell how. What's it called? Advanced their technology is. Yeah, like you said, World War II weapons, but this is taking place in 14,582, not like 2024. You know, like we're dealing with how many years? About 12,000 years in the future, and they still have weapons like ours from not ours. From the past of ours, actually. We have better weapons now. And these are anthropomorphic animals in a war. And this is their 7th World War. They've had 7 world wars. How are you in conflict all the time? Oh my goodness. Well, I have so much left to read. There are 20 chapters. I'm on chapter 2. I think I should continue. What are you thinking, though? What do you think of this book? Does this intrigue you? So that first chapter was to establish the climate of what's going on. Although, at the end there, with all the names, I was like, okay, cool names, but also, what are they... What I don't know, their economic statuses... Just mentioning a bunch of names and not really mentioning their economic statuses or whatever. It's been great so far. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I'm also enjoying this. This is fun. So now we got chapter 2. This is subject 3623. That's the chapter title. The alarm clock rang its wake-up call. A tired groan answered it. A pinkish gray furless hand and a light brown, furry forearm reached out to shut the alarm up from the comfort of thick, warm blankets. Sitting up in bed and rubbing its eyes, the Norwegian man began its warning. He looked first at the small window to the outside world. It was dark and the sky had a few streaks of red and purple left among the blackness. Was it morning or evening? It was hard to tell down here in Seismoria, the southernmost continent on planet Georth. Depending on what season it was, the sun might never rise or never set. That was most confusing. He looked at his clock. It was indeed late morning. He stretched and yawned before scratching his belly with his short, dog-like claws. Ooh. Oh, hello. Hello, young Clippa. Have you enjoyed the book I've been reading?
How long do you think this is gonna take you? Because you were like, I could do it in one stream, maybe 2.
No, I have to do multiple streams because I just started chapter 2 and there's 20 chapters. It's 20. It's a thick book. I don't know what type of book it was. I didn't read anything about this book at all when I started to stream. I was just like, yeah, it'll be a quick read. It took me an hour to read chapter 1.
I think it's just because you don't pronounce any of the. You don't speak English, so you can't read any of the
There's no
words
English
in
in
the
this book. Georth isn't an English word. Georth.
book.
A
I know, you're
freaking
dealing with the
Nor-
sci-fi wordisms.
Norveshuian. That's not English.
Even if it was, you also wouldn't know what it means. Like,
That's true.
you don't know what ragged is. Like running yourself ragged, or a ragged
Ragged.
piece of metal, or
Rigid.
you have to cut that out as a short. It was like 46 seconds of you like struggling with the word ragged.
Ragged.
I'll try to do a few chapters.
Oh, that's the goal. I'm gonna...
You currently have 3 books to read this month, quote unquote. But it's like the end of the month, and there's no fucking way.
There's no way.
I guess read away.
I'll read away. Are you enjoying the book? Are you enjoying the book?
It's not my thing. I'm also not gonna look into Dune either. So it's not a reflection of quality. It's the names. It's the sci-fi-isms.
The sci-fi-isms are
I
hard.
like westerns. You know, I wanna hear about a fellow with a rifle at Miller's watering hole. Not like, you know.
Norveshuian.
I don't need to know about the Antretties and the Diakarskas.
Look,
and the way that the
I don't
19th
get...
Realms War 4 started. Sci-fi is not my thing.
I don't get the sci-fi names. I mean, I like sci-fi, but I don't get sci-fi names. As complicated as it needs to be.
It's just fun and
like
interesting
Spock.
and unique and original,
It's,
right?
Yeah.
I know, but somebody else already did Spock. Somebody else
Sport.
already did the Skywalkers.
Sport.
There's, you know, it's like
Name
Darth
it after
Maul,
things
like,
that exist. Like, I know they have like
do not
a
name your character Sport. Don't listen to me. Go back to.
Alright. I mean, I like this book and like the world. The names. It is the names. I feel like the name. It's the thing with sci-fi. I'm like, I guess, yeah, those sound weird because they're like different languages and different planets and such. But like, is it really like have to be like hard to pronounce? Hey, look, I took 5 hours to read 20 pages of Dune when I was 13. I had to refer to appendix every 2 lines. Keep your jump bar sharp. I shall. I'm learning words as I read this too. That's pretty cool. Alright, where is I at? He stretched and yawned before scratching his belly with his short, dog-like claws. Groaning again, he got out of bed and made for the nearby bathroom to do his morning routine. As he passed the mirror over the sink, he took a look at his eyes. Gray pupils stared back at him, tired and unfocused. He hadn't slept well last night. He often didn't. Most of his body was covered in light brown fur. His lower muzzle, throat, chest, and belly were the color of cream. Right now, his fur was rustled and unkempt from sleep. He stripped and went into the shower. Despite how cold Moria was, at least the shower was still hot. After a few relaxing minutes of soaking up the hot water in his fur and applying plenty of soap and shampoo to his body, he finished up and got out to begin the rest of his day. After drying off and dressing in a long-sleeved undershirt, brown utility pants, black shoes, a warm overshirt, and a white lab coat, he got out of his little apartment room and entered a sterile white hallway. The name tag on his lab coat read Dr. Richard James Alk, but everyone here just called him Richie. He hated being called Richie. Only his mother was allowed to call him Richie, but everyone else is allowed to. What do you mean allowed? Clearly, you're not putting your foot down enough. If you hate everyone calling you Richie and no one's allowed to call you Richie unless it's your mom. So you should have said that. But everyone calls you Richie. Dude, you're failing. You're failing at life. Hello, Corn Diff. Hello. Glad to see you here. May the corn be with you. Yeah, Dune is the benchmark where when you're first starting sci-fi as a kid, you get past the other books. Alright, cakewalk. I don't think I've ever read Dune, actually. Um, Never read Dune. I think the sci-fi books I read growing up were the Haddix books. Um, like the one where they have like a bunch of babies on a plane from the past, and like all these babies are on a plane in the past, and they're part of this specific time period, and they're supposed to go back and fulfill their duties in the past. Otherwise, the past won't happen, and then all the babies on the plane won't exist. So that's pretty much what that is. I forget what it's called, but I've read at least like the first 3 books of the series that I'm describing. Uh, the last one that I read of the series, it was a green cover. It had like a train on it. I forget what the title was called. It was green. If you've read those books, let me know. The hallways with a the hallways was a hexagonally shaped tube. Linoleum tiles lined the floor, and white panels covered the walls. Fluorescent lighting fixtures made an illuminated pathway along the ceiling. He passed by several other doors to apartments just like his. The other workers live here in the facility. Richard lived and worked in the Seismorian Bioalchemy Research Facility, or S-BARF, as it was jokingly called. Originally a prison constructed about 8 decades ago, the facility had been converted into a scientific research facility just after the end of World War VI. Dr. Richard himself had come here 17 years ago. He had been a zoologist and had worked at a zoo in his homeland of Galric, almost directly north of here. During college, he'd studied bioalchemy, was offered the chance to become a bioalchemist himself. Richard loved animals, but now he was given the chance to help create new altered animals and life forms. He'd taken the opportunity and wound up on the frigid wasteland of Seismoria, not too far from the South Pole. It had taken him several years to adjust to life this far south, and in some ways, he still had yet to adjust. This morning was a perfect example. Even though he had woke up in late morning, the sky was still mostly dark. Because it was autumn down here in the southern hemisphere, the sun didn't rise too far from the horizon. It stayed dark most of the day this season. Come winter, and it would be perpetual night for the months. The exact opposite was true during summer. This was something Richard was sure he could never get used to. He'd learned to deal with the extreme cold, but this was more of a psychological problem for him. As he continued to walk through the hallways of the facility, he came across a set of double doors and pushed them open. Adjusting his lab coat, he approached a familiar group of anthros, also dressed in white lab coats. These fellow scientists also lived and worked here in the facility. Oh my goodness! Leo, for the $20 Redinos, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate for the effort. Oh, thank you so much. You did not have to, but I appreciate it so much. Snowpiercer. I've never read Snowpiercer, but I've watched the movie. Yeah. Boy. Understands. I'm gonna put in more of the effort to read these words. It doesn't seem that I'm encountering weird words, science fiction words. So, this chapter, it was mostly that last chapter. We'll see, though. So this guy is a scientist. That's cool. Good visualization. I'm able to visualize this guy. Good morning, Richie, said a thin Catan woman in a pleasant alto voice. Wait. Good morning, Richie, said a thin Catan woman in a pleasant alto voice. Morning, Loga, Richard replied with a smile. Amanda Loga was young and attractive. She had arrived at this facility less than 2 years ago. But somehow she had adjusted to it better than Richard had in the past 17. She had big yellow eyes set inside of her short-cropped Khitan fur mask, and her white lab coat went well with what white fur she had left. Being a woman, she had her fur shaven down, despite the freezing climate here. Her black and white ringed tail bobbed up and down slightly. She wore a gold necklace and bronze bracelets on her wrist. Who the fuck is reading? Have you checked out the subjects yet? I was just on my way to. Look at me. That's where I'm headed right now. Loga chuckled, her round ears flicking. Well, don't let me stop you. That's all I need, Richard said. The Norvescuan continued on, his long, furless, rat-like tail swaying gently behind him with each step. Mac, Wesker, and Izzy, 2 Khitans, and a Carthusian, stood nearby and were busy looking at reports on their clipboards. Izzy, who used fur removal salves to remain completely hairless, looked up and nodded her head to Richard. What's on the docket for today? She asked before looking back down at the clipboard. I'm going to check out subject 3623's target accuracy, he said. Fun. I took a break and now I'm back. Welcome back. Glad to see you here. How are you doing? Dr. Richard James Ock went through another set of doors and continued to walk through a series of corridors, giving him time to think. First, he thought of bioalchemy. Bioalchemy was an ancient practice. Part science, part sorcery. It was hard to precisely define what bioalchemy technically was.
You did a Borderlands trailer reaction with Bird and didn't edit it and release it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's put that up tomorrow.
Okay.
So you don't have a try on.
Alright. I forgot about it, but I honestly forgot.
I remembered about it just now, so I mean...
Yeah, well, I'll do that then tomorrow.
Sorry, I saw another ad for Borderlands, like, I meant to do a trailer reaction, and then I remembered you did!
I did! Good thing I did. Alright. Where was I at? Oh, jeez. Rudely interrupting me. It was hard to precisely define what bioalchemy was. Basically, bioalchemy allowed for the modification and creation of new life forms called chimeras. The blood-sucking Zalvark was one notorious creation. Created several millennia earlier, the Zalvark was a baboon-like reptile that fed on the blood of other animals.
Called a chimera. Is your phone dying or something?
Is it?
I heard a sound.
Shouldn't be, it's on a charger. It's at 53%.
This is like a text or something. You don't pay attention to phone noises, but I don't know if you can hear them or not.
I can't.
I heard a buzz on the stream.
I can't hear any phone noises. Hello.
Go back to reading your book.
But you're here, though.
You gotta read, what, like 4 chapters?
It's so many chapters.
We'll divide it into a doable amount of time.
Okay.
You don't want to do 20 streams.
No.
Maybe 6 of them?
Yeah.
Well, how many chapters per stream would that goal then be? If you want to do 5 or 6 streams.
If I want to do 5 or 6, like, probably 4 chapters per stream. So, I think that's the goal. Alright. What was I? Oh, Jesus. Had to interrupt me. I don't know where I was at. They had been created as a terror weapon by worshippers of Alvenk Karglibin, the dark god of chaos. They had either escaped or been released from their cages and had since infested the jungles and swamps of the outside world. Of course, that was an example of the negative use of bioalchemy. In the past 2 centuries since the rediscovery of the ancient ways of bioalchemy, scientists have been seeking to improve upon the gods' design of life forms. Blasphemous, perhaps, but science would continue to march on. Bioalchemy was a mysterious science that seemed to disappear for centuries at a time, usually with the fall of a society or the destruction of a library, only to be rediscovered sometime later. It had happened multiple times throughout history. As he thought about it, it wasn't such a strange occurrence. Technology had been lost to history only to be rediscovered sometime later. This was true of concrete and gunpowder. He then thought about Seismoria, and specifically about New Belikth, the country he resided in. New Belikth was founded over a century ago by explorers, miners, and scientists, all seeking to find something in the frozen wasteland of Seismoria. Frigid but survivable, New Belikth was located along the northern coastline of the continent. The nation, such as it was sparsely populated to begin with only one medium-sized city called Frontier Town along the coast, as well as several other smaller towns laid out in as well as several other smaller towns laid out like points on a web. The country would not even be inhabited were it not for the fact that the land was rich in natural resources like coal and oil. A future blessing as a result of the worldwide Great Deluge of 1656. The discovery of resources made a few of the intrepid miners very wealthy. The rest of the workers lived and worked in small, near-frozen mining outposts. Some of the larger outposts have become towns with populations of non-miners. There were fewer people here than in one of the bigger cities up north, Richard reckoned. Vekesh, Naplom, and a couple of the outlying islands also were thinly populated countries here on Seismoria, but they were located far away. There were frequent blizzards that resulted in whiteouts that would last for days. Luckily for Richard, he never had to leave the facility. Because New Belikth was a proverbial gold mine of coal and oil, it had quickly been exploited and settled. The frontier, what they still call it, was constantly explored in the hopes of finding new beds of coal and pools of oil. New Belikth collects and ships most of the resources back to the rest of the world up north through a trade system of massive tanker ships that come and go once a month. The ships carry much needed food and supplies to Frontier Town, and they return to their home ports laden with coal and unrefined petroleum. The trade kept New Belikth alive. And then there were the nuclear power plant, Richard thought. Still, a relatively newfangled invention. Nuclear power saw the release of massive amounts of energy from radioactive materials that was capable of providing years or perhaps decades worth of power. This was truly a godsend, anthrokind. Still, fossil fuels provided the vast majority of power to the world. Richard often wondered why they would build a nuclear power plant in Frontier Town when there was already so much coal and petroleum to be used. He had heard that once it was loaded with radioactive fuel, the plant was capable of running for a decade before it had to be loaded again. He had doubted that theory. Another one he had heard was that nuclear power plants were better in colder climates. Again, he doubted its veracity. Oh my goodness. It's like a Western too. They're living in Frontier Town. Yeah, it's like a Western, but it was cold, I guess. Oh my goodness. Very famous YouTuber Tony for Hack the Movies. You found your copy? You found your copy of this book? You should read it. You should read this book, Tony. He's very famous YouTuber Tony from Hack the Movies. I can't believe we have a celebrity amongst us. We have a celebrity here. Oh my goodness. We're blessed. We're all blessed to be in the presence of a celebrity. Where was I at, though? The bioalchemy facility was about as far away from Frontier Town as it was possible. The nearest mining outpost was about 10 or 15 miles to the northwest. Located at the foot of Sir Bernathi mountain range, this was considered to be the limit of the nation's boundaries. Beyond this mountain range, there were only hundreds of thousands of square miles of ice and snow. Beyond all of that was the South Pole. It was a no man's land of frozen death. It was beautiful from a distance, though. Richard walked past the wing of the facility where the chimeras were kept. He pressed several numbered buttons on a wall-mounted keypad near the door. The door unlocked, and he entered the next room. The walls and overhead lighting here were cold blue, which reflected the climate outside. He pulled a clipboard from a nail on the wall and began to flip through pages. Subject 3623, he said to himself. Richard turned right and walked past another set of doors into another corridor. To the left and right were a series of doors, each one marked with a number. Some of them had locks and warnings on them. He came to the room for subject 3623 and knocked on the door. Red eyes? Knock, 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 knock. Red eyes? He let himself in and looked around. It was an apartment just like his. The accommodations were somewhat austere. What the fuck? Aserte. Austere. How do you pronounce this? Austere. I don't know. I've never seen that word before. With only a couch, a small table, and a couple of chairs up against one wall, while another was dominated by a large bookcase and television.
Austere.
Austere?
What is that? Well put together.
Oh.
Fanciful.
Austere.
Think of like Fred Astaire, the dancer. His little dancey shoes and his tuxedo as a shorthand for...
Good to know.
Or I'm fucking with you. You'll never know anything, because you never look it up.
Austere. Austere. Thank you. Knowledge. Somewhat austere with only a couch, a small table, and a couple of chairs up against one wall, while another was dominated by a large bookcase and a television set with a wooden exterior. The carpeted floor was a swampy green, while the walls were covered with wood paneling. A dozen or so books were scattered haphazardly about the bookcase and the table. 3 of the walls were rectangles, while the 4th wall was curved about and curved inward at the ceiling. A small window looked out at barren, icy plains and the dark sky. The green glow of the southern aurora was just visible at the edge of the window. As he continued to look, he saw in amusement that a number of small plastic army men were frozen in an imaginary battle for one of the bookcase's shelves. Red eyes? He called aloud again. He heard a knocking sound coming from the next room. Venturing into the small bedroom, he saw Red Eyes standing there. She was an anthropomorphic penguin. This is it! This is the introduction of the penguin. Power penguin. She'll never know I gave her the opposite of the right definition. Yeah, by context clues, austere doesn't seem to be, I don't know, whatever you said. I don't remember, actually. Bare, not ornate. Oh, okay. Oh my goodness, hi Richard. How you doing? How are you? Glad to see you here. Gengar. Born 16 years earlier, Subject 3623 was a chimera created through the use of bioalchemy. Using the genetics of a penguin and the base DNA of a crustacean, she resembled an anthro, but had distinctly penguin features. She was covered in tiny brownish black feathers with bands of white on her chest, neck, and going up the sides of her head. Her black beak reflected some of the ambient light of the room. She had black, three-toed, webbed feet ending in claws. She had normal hands like any other anthro with 3 fingers, an opposable thumb, and short, blunt claws on the ends. She had pink-colored splotches around her eye sockets, which made her piercing red eyes stand out all the more. Instead of the typical long anthro tail, she had a short stub of a penguin tail. She was dressed in a simple long-sleeved shirt, utility pants, and a skirt over the pants. She was a bit shorter than Richie at about 5.5 feet and a bit stockier than the average female. "Good morning, Red Eyes," Richard said happily. "How are you doing today?" "Good morning to you too, Richie," she communicated through the use of her hands. Oh, sorry, she's mute. How am I supposed to communicate good morning to you too, Richie? She communicated through the use of her hands. "I'm doing well. How about you?" She smiled at him. "Through my hands." This is okay. I'm going to translate in sign language. Did it. I'll rewatch when I go to bed. Smoke them if you got them. Heck yeah. Yes. Glad you stopped by. Woo. Power Penguin. Power Penguin. We got the alliteration. That's how you know it's good. Yeah, it's a alliteration. Where the fuck was I? I'm fine. Thanks. Red Eyes spoke through the use of sign language, a universal technique of nonverbal communication. It was most often used between speakers of different languages in order to easily communicate. What type of sign language is this? Is this American Sign Language? Because there's different sign languages. Like, there's American Sign Language, there's French Sign Language. There has to be other, like Chinese sign language, Japanese sign language. There has to be different other types of sign languages. So this is a sign language that is just spoken, universally. Do they all speak the same language on this planet? I mean, obviously no, because there's different languages, but this is something I'm curious about. Why is my sign language? This is my sign language. I don't know any sign language whatsoever. The only thing I know is this means fuck you, and this means thank you, and this means fuck you. It's too close. Too close. Like, a deaf person could be really offended by the placement of your hands. Jeez. Oh, Jesus. Translators and ambassadors often use sign language when talking to foreign speakers. People who had been deafened could also use it to communicate. Sign language involved the precise movement of the fingers and hands in order to display signs and convey words. Red Eyes, who Richard knew was unable to speak due to her mixed genetic makeup, was extremely fluent in sign language and could easily talk through it. She had taught her when she was a mere youngling. Red Eyes' bedroom was very similar to Richie's. Aside from the bed and the thick, warm covers, the room also had another couple of bookshelves. One of them was covered with books, comics, and videotapes, while the other were numerous toys and action figures. These all had been Richie's influence and gifts to her. Richie was a big fan of pulp adventure novels, action movies, toys, and comics. He had bought these from a small specialty shop up in Frontier Town and had given them to Red Eyes. She quickly grew to love them as much as he did. Did you sleep? Any better last night?" Richie asked. "Unfortunately, no." Red Eyes signed. Whenever she speaks, I'm gonna sign too. Sign. I don't know anything. It's officially the Power Penguin language now. Sign language. The official language of the Power Penguin. I'm sorry to hear that. I have tried the usual sleep remedies, but they do not seem to work on me. Neither does caffeine in the morning to wake me up. Maybe you could try some mild narcotics, Richie suggested. They work well for me. Okay. Have you had breakfast yet? Not yet, no. Me neither. Come on, let's get something to eat. The Norwegian and the Penguin left the apartment and walked back down the hexagonal corridors. As they continued along the hallways, Richard thought of something else. After breakfast, we'll do some target practice. Sound good? Sure thing, she sighed. Is Halvor here to do it? No, Richard said. He's currently up in Galvek. Master Sergeant Halvor was an independent mercenary who had fought in World War VI and later sold his military expertise in order to train others. He had been convinced to come down to New Blech in order to train the anthropomorphic chimeras at the mysterious bioalchemy facility. He had helped to train Subject 3623 in handling weapons, hand-to-hand combat, and military tactics. He was also able to procure weapons, ammunition, and certain other supplies that couldn't usually be bought out in the open. What is he doing up there? Red Eyes asked. I don't know, Richie said. Anyway, we just got in a new shipment of ammunition from Frontier Town. Logan picked it up yesterday. She also picked up a couple of new AT-14As from our supplier. The two of them ended up in the small mess hall. Richard picked up a serving of reptilian Durick steak, while Red Eyes got fried dactyl breast with macaroni and cheese. They sat down at the table, and Richard said a quick prayer thanking Hulak Tarish, the god of nature. I still don't understand something, Richie said after swallowing a bite of steak. What is it? What is it? You're a penguin, but you don't like to eat fish. Red Eyes glared at him. Penguins eat fish, said matter-of-factly. Well, I do not. Richie chuckled. I will not eat anything that smells that bad. Richie laughed. Whatever you say, Red Eyes. The penguin rolled her namesake eyes before returning to her dactyl meal. Izzy, a Crucian woman with no fur, entered the mess hall and got some food of her own before sitting down next to Richard. She was having a Slavic burger and fried potato slices. Hey, Richie, Red Eyes, she said as she sat down. How are you doing today? I'm good, Richie said before he cut another piece of steak. I'm too as well, Richie sighed. Good to hear, she said, somewhat ironically. Dr. Isabella Lagrin could also understand and speak sign language since she often worked alongside Richie and Red Eyes. She tended to other chimeras stationed here in the facility. She and Richie had tried a romance sometime before. It hadn't worked out, but they still remained friends afterward. She thought that Richie was a tremendous nerd, and not in a complimentary way. Who's going on the next supply run? Red Eyes asked. Wesker and Matt, Izzy said. Why? Just curious. Richie smiled. Red Eyes was always curious and eager to learn new things. I think what Red Eyes means is that she wants to know that they'll pick up the right comics this time. Wesker doesn't know a thing about comics, and Mac thinks that pulp is just the stuff in orange juice. Izzy laughed and Red Eyes smiled, showing the small crucians-like teeth inside her beak. Don't worry, Richie said. I'll write it down for him. Please, be sure to be very specific and precise. I will. The three of them finished their breakfast and put their dishes in the wash area. Now, time for target practice, Richie said. You want to come along? He asked Izzy. Sure, I got nothing else to do for a while. The trio made their way to the round, domed armory located along the outside edge of the facility. Here they stored numerous weapons and boxes of ammunition for training their anthropomorphic super soldier chimeras. Red Eyes. Oh, there's a bug in here actually. Get out of here. Oh, it flew from the wall. It's a mosquito hawk, aka a crane fly, whatever you want to call them. Okay. All right. Oh, jeez. I don't like bugs. I don't like bugs. There's two of them in here? What the fuck? How'd you get in here? Jesus. Anyway, well. Where's I? God damn it, these bugs. They're distracting me. Oh, I'm like at the bottom of this page. Red Eyes opened a locker and took out 3 snowsuits. She gave one each to Richie and Izzy before donning one herself. It fit over her clothes like a big jumpsuit and was heavily insulated from the cold. They put earplugs in and protective goggles over their eyes. Richie and Izzy put on heavy wool hats and facial coverings, but Red Eyes did not. Richie selected and picked up several different firearms, while Izzy wrote them down on the clipboard. Red Eyes took an AT-14A battle rifle from Richie, dutifully checked to make sure that the action was empty and the safety was on, and opened the door to the outside. It was still relatively dark outside, but numerous amber lights illuminated the outside perimeter of the facility. A light snow was falling. The southern aurora could be seen overhead in all of its heavenly glory amongst the stars. No matter how many times Richie saw it, the aurora was always magical to look at. Izzy flicked a switch in a fuse box inside the room, and several lights came on, revealing a large target range out in the snow. There were lights on tall overhead lamp stands, as well as lights placed on the ground in front of each target. They were protected by heavy iron plating. Richie emerged carrying 2 more weapons. He set them down on a table attached to the exterior of the facility. His breath came out of his nostrils in clouds of steam. When viewed from the outside, the facility was a series of interconnected and overlapping domes. The gray stone blocks were usually completely covered in snow. Tonight, they reflected some of the green from the sky. A tall telescope receiving towers was set up nearby. Just a stone's throw away from the facility was a foothill of the Sir Bernathi Mountains. Since the facility was located in the middle of nowhere, they could shoot off guns without any worry of accidental damage to property. Let's start with the AT-14A, Richard said, exhaling steam. He was cold already. Red Eyes picked up the Balfour Armament Technologies AT-14A. Designed just over 2 decades ago, the battle rifle is the mainstay of the Free Republic's armies all over the world. 4 feet long, powerful, and extremely accurate, the rifle was made of dark gray metal with a stock, pistol grip, and long forward hand grip made of orange-brown wood. The rifle had a long barrel, giving it excellent accuracy. It fired 30 rounds of .30 caliber ammunition, each shot powerfully enough to take down an anthro. A handle could be raised up in order to carry the weapon, or it could be folded down out of the way. Designed just after the war, the battle rifle was intended to counter some of the shortcomings of past rifle designs. It had been sporadic combat in. It had seen sporadic combat in various places, but it had never been tested in a major war. Red Eyes inserted a straight 30-round magazine and operated the action again to chamber the first cartridge. She flicked off the safety and made sure that the weapon was set to semi-automatic mode. All right, Richie said, loud enough to be heard over the earplugs. Let's start with target B7. Red Eyes nodded before shouldering her rifle. Taking careful aim through the iron sights, she fired the first shot. Readjusting the sights from her cartridge kick, she fired again and again. She fired shots off faster as she went along. 30 rounds later, the rifle's action locked back empty. Red Eyes pushed the magazine release button and picked up the empty magazine from the snow. She flicked the safety back to the on position before turning back to face Richie and Izzy. Very good, Richie said. Let's go check the target out. Three of them walked the short distance to target B7 and looked at it. They were many shots in or near the center of the target. Only a couple of the faster follow-up shots had strayed from the center. Richie wrote down the results. Very good indeed. Jesus. Okay, we're almost done with this chapter. The three of them returned to the table on the facility's exterior and repeated the process. Red Eyes continued to fire at several more targets from her AT-14A. She switched from her semi-automatic mode to the 3-round burst mode. Developed as a means to deliver rapid shots without the ammunition wastage of fully automatic fire, the 3-round burst mode was much harder to control due to the rifle's recoil. The second and third rounds were virtually guaranteed to miss their initial target. After several magazines, Richie handed her the Kaplan D46 submachine gun. Like the AT-14A, this automatic weapon was only supposed to be used by the militaries of the Free Republican nations. Their supplier, as well as the lax gun restrictions in New Black, meant they had access to the hardware. The newest mainstay to the Free Republic forces, the D46 submachine gun, had a folding stock that could fold up on the top of the weapon in order to save space. Red Eyes folded the stock back down to its ready position and inserted a 30-round magazine of .40 caliber rounds into the pistol grip. She pulled back on the action before letting loose with several quick, controlled bursts of fire. The gun had a rather heavy forward hand grip that cut down on the recoil and muzzle grip of the weapon. Red Eyes did the same as she did with the AT-14A before moving on to the rigid G18 pistol. Having been around for many decades, it was considered to be one of history's most widely used and copied pistol designs. It fired 10 shots of the universal .40 caliber pistol rounds. Following this, she finished up with the always reliable Somas 14 carbine, looking a bit like a humpbacked submachine gun. The carbine could only fire semi-automatically. It used a 20-round magazine of pistol ammo that was also inserted into the hand grip. It was a very popular plinking gun for civilians. It was used by police and guards, but it saw little military use, except usually as a training weapon. All right, Richie said. Now, let's do blinkers and covers. Go back to the 1814A for this one. The penguin nodded, breath steaming. Izzy stood next to the control box for the lights, while Red Eyes crouched down behind a large cement block that was partially covered with snow. And go! Red Eyes popped up from behind the cover of the cement block and looked for the target whose light blinked on. She instantly swung her battle rifle towards it and fired. She then ducked back behind the block. When she popped back up, Izzy had changed the light target to a different one. The penguin fired at the target as well before running to hide behind a different cement block. They repeated the process, ducking behind cover and hitting different targets until her magazine ran out. After they had spent a while outside, Richard and Izzy were very cold. All right, Red Eyes. I think that's good enough for today. Come on, let's go back inside, Richard said. The Anthro penguin put down the long rifle on the table before signing. Okay. The three of them did one final check of Red Eye's target accuracy before packing up the weapons and going back inside of the facility. By the gods, it's cold out there, Richard groaned. Izzy nodded. It does not bother me. It does not bother me, Red Eye said. Izzy rolled her amber eyes. That's because you're designed for this climate. Red Eye smiled. It advantages me being a penguin chimera. Richard and Izzy chuckled as they put away the guns and counted to make sure that they had everything back inside in its place. After the three of them had taken off their snowsuits, they made their way back into the white hallways of the facility. The two Cantons, Mac and Wesker, saw the trio and walked up to them. They all walked together as a group. Hey, Richie. Hi, Mac. How's Subject 3623 doing? Wesker asked. Red Eyes looked at Wesker, then directed her gaze back at Richie. She's doing good, Richie said, speaking for her. We just got back from the firing range. She was pretty accurate today. Good, good, Wesker said. So, wait, different guy. So, our rotation was coming to an end, Matt said, but we decided to stay on for another season. Oh, really? Richie asked. After all this time, you still want to stay in this frozen wasteland? I guess we've grown to it. Hi, guys! A scared-looking older Crochon female came running down the hall. That's not her female name. Hi, guys! That's so goofy. Maybe something like, Hey, guys! What is it, Alice? Mac asked. The Crochon tried to catch her breath. It's war out there. The Confederate Alliance has bombed a bunch of Free Alliance cities. By the gods, are you sure? Yeah, she said. I just heard it on the radio. Come on. She ran down the hall with the others following her. They turned a couple corners before coming to Alice's lab space. Her radio was still turned on and they heard it as soon as they entered the room. Causing massive damage in the several Jesuitian cities, a land invasion force crossed the mountain border and entered the nation. At the same time, the Morgorian naval base of Vintron was shelled before being bombed by the Taichu's Air Force. You see? Alice said, pointing at the radio. It's World War VII! The radio continued. Reports are that the massive naval warships have all begun to blockade the city of Morgopolis, as well as other major coastal cities. Damn, Richie said. I guess we won't want to leave here anytime soon, Max said softly, putting his arm around Wesker and pulling him close. Whew. That was chapter 2. Most normal midstream. Well, thank you. This is actually most normal midstream because of how normal it is outside. Oh my goodness. It takes like an hour to read a chapter. Jeez. Wow, I'm not good at reading. Okay, how long is the third chapter? Oh wait, that's chapter 5. From 45 to 70, that's the goal. So chapter 3. Confederate lands. At the heart of the Meschek Empire sat at what was commonly known. Before I continue this and misread all over, I'm gonna drink some water. Great job on the voices, thank you. Whenever I do a reading stream, I always want to have different voices because then you can tell who's talking. Drink some water if you haven't. Confederate plans. In the heart of the Meschek Empire sat what was commonly called the ziggurat. It was a colossal construction project that resembled an ancient step pyramid. The ziggurat was located just outside of the capital city of Tubal, and was the center for the Meschek military forces. As impressive as the facade was, it was nothing compared to the powerful military mobilization that surrounded and protected it. Hundreds of panzers and anti-aircraft guns lined the perimeter of the ziggurat. A large airfield sat nearby, fighters always at the ready. The military base surrounding the ziggurat was massive. Inside the ziggurat, a Khatan in a highly decorated, rust-colored military uniform marched down a set of stairs, deep into the heart of the building. He was Field Marshal Repulsus Iontide, currently the highest-ranking Confederate Army officer in the Meschek Empire. His long black and white striped tail followed his every move. He walked for several minutes down stairway after stairway before coming to an elevator shaft. By this point, he was already several stories underground. He walked up to the elevator's button panel and pressed several buttons of a secret code that was only known to the highest-ranking generals and admirals. The elevator doors opened with what sounded like a sinister hiss. He stepped in and tucked his long lemur-like tail in after him. He had the experience of getting it caught several times before. Several times! Jeez. Most Catans did. The elevator descended deep underground. Theoretically, it was too deep for bomb blasts to have any penetrative effect. Rippleless Iontide tapped his booted foot and took a deep breath. Rippleless Iontide had lived practically his whole life in the Meshchik army. He was the youngest person to gain the rank of field marshal in modern times. He was somewhat shorter than the average Catan male and had gotten all kinds of grief about it. Perhaps he joined the army as a way to prove himself to those who questioned him due to his size. He had a brilliant tactical mind and could move troop formations around as easily as pieces on a chessboard. He was notable for having a relatively calm demeanor compared to many of the other bombastic personalities that the military often brought out. He had fought in a few small regional wars as a young man before participating in World War VI. Of course, that world had resulted in a humiliating defeat for its homeland of Meshchek. In the 23 years of relative peace since then, he had redoubled his efforts to make the Meshchek army a force to be reckoned with again. Thanks largely to their ally in the north, Tychos, Meshchek was able to rearm itself. It began first in secret, but later it was done in full view of the impotent Free Republic General Council. He achieved field marshal rank in the decade after the war. Had his strategies been followed to the letter, the outcome of the last Great War might have been different. He had spent many a sleepless night pondering hypothetical battlefield scenarios, both of the past and of the future. Now the future war he had thought about was finally here. It had been 3 days since the declaration of war and the first attacks. The Free Republic forces had been seemingly blindsided by the swiftness and extent of the attacks. They had scrambled to try to respond. In the years immediately following the end of World War VI, the Republic forces had decided that now, with the threat eliminated, they should disarm themselves to prevent the possibility of another global war breaking out. Hundreds of proud warships have been sent to shipbreaking yards to be cut down for scrap metal. Thousands of airplanes and panzers were destroyed and simply discarded by rubbish. Bleh. Or simply discarded like rubbish. Millions of battle rifles and machine guns have been melted down, what with them not being needed anymore. Military technology had not advanced for many years afterwards. What utter stupidity, Iontide thought. The current war had come to a close, but there would be always another one right around the corner. Conflict was an inevitable part of nature. One could not simply throw away his scattergun after he had scared off one would-be burglar from his homestead. Where there was one criminal, there was always going to be countless more like him. The best way to have peace was to be prepared for war. After a while, the elevator door opened. Outside of the elevator, he saw the familiar sight of the Empire's war room. Dark in all of the right places, with only the necessary amount of ambient light, the war room was foreboding to most, comforting to a few. Iontide was one of those few. In some ways, he considered the war room a second home. He cleared the elevator and descended another set of stairs. By this point, the whole glory of the room was revealed to him once again. It was a large room shaped like a four-sided pyramid with slanting walls. Upon the back wall is a giant map of planet Georth-Sat. On the walls to the left and the right sat other large maps that were zoomed in on specific areas of the world. A circular central table seated dozens of high-ranking officials. A number of fluorescent lights hung down from the ceiling, providing some illumination. All of the walls, tables, and chairs were made of the same shiny black material. The Confederate Alliance symbol, a 5-pointed star overlapping another upside-down star, surrounded by a circle hung on banners and flags. Whew. Rippleless Irontide walked past the familiar desks and tables. Each one was surrounded by the usual busy technicians. Crosuans, Norvegians, and Catons all milled around, both male and female. On average, women made about 1/5 of all the armed forces around the world. Besides frontline combat, many more were in support, auxiliary, or non-combat roles. Oftentimes, those who weren't in the military worked in munition factories for the war effort. Stationed at various spots along the wall. Stationed at various spots along the dark walls were Imperial Sentinels. The Imperial Sentinels were highly dangerous guardsmen of the Meschek Empire. They were all clad in identical black armor with silver highlights as well as a black cape down their backs. They wore masks similar to gas masks over their faces, obscuring their species, sex, and identities. Rippleless Irontide knew that many of them were trained personally by the Blade Master in the art of sword fighting. They could be armed with swords, electrostaffs, electropikes, or modified pistols. Silent and secretive, they were handpicked from the elite of the elite. Fiercely fanatical to the Confederate ideology, they lived and served without question. There was a rumor going around that the Imperial Sentinels were actually genetically altered chimeras. This was due to their seemingly impossible strength, reaction time, ability to withstand wounds, fighting strength, and ability to wear the heavy and hot suits for extended periods of time. He had even heard rumors that some of them might be genetically altered Rubarians, the ferocious, wolf-like sub-anthros that prowled the forests. Irontide reached a spot near the right wall's large maps. A big Croatian general, a head taller than him, approached. "Good morning, Field Marshal," the general said. "Good morning, General Grant." That's not different voices. So the first voice, "Good morning, Field Marshal." And then second, "Good morning, General Grant," Irontide said. "What's the progress on our little war?" "Everything is going according to plan, Field Marshal," Grant said, pointing up at the maps. "We have successfully crippled the major Free Republic naval bases of Silbiz, Garnock, Hardiz, and Portsmouth." "Very good." "Rolandia has begun the second phase of its ground invasion," Grant said with a smile. "Vidron have been shelled by Grand Admiral Vinari's fleet, and they are moving towards blockading Morgopolis. That should teach those bastards a lesson." Irontide hissed through his teeth. Grant nodded. He extended his arm. He pointed Irontide toward another map. "The Tycho's army had begun its march south into Delp. Their meager military forces won't be able to put up much of a fight against our army. I predict success in a matter of days." "Predictions, nothing," Irontide replied. "You can never predict anything in war. Delp's army may fall quickly, but the populace could put up a fight that will leave our men and women bogged down in house-to-house conflict for months. You must plan for all possible contingencies, no matter how unlikely they may seem." "If that's the case," Grant said, "why not simply level every house in the country?" Irontide chuckled. "Now you're thinking with power." Another Caton, this one a Grand Admiral, approached Irontide and Grant. She shook hands with the Field Marshal. "Field Marshal Irontide," she said. "Grand Mons Admiral Vin," he said. "I see that..." Oh shit. He's speaking to Irontide. "Field Marshal Irontide," she said. "Grand Admiral Vin," he said. "I see that Dinan and Mikulabola have begun their blockades of Galwick and Ty. I assume that a blockade of Granico is next." "Indeed," Grand Admiral Tasha Vin said. There was a certain kind of respect between these two, seeing that They were both a 5-star military officer. The normal childlike bickering between the branches of the Army and the Navy had plagued the world's militaries for millennia. Iantide and Finn were both at the top of their respective fields. She had worked up from a gunner on a patrol boat to being in command of nearly the entire navy of the Meshchek Empire. Her mind worked like Iantide's. She scrutinized every possible angle before deciding on a strategy. Many lesser officers and personnel had thought that the two of them were romantically involved. They were both single at their ages, so people had jumped to conclusions. The two of them were close, but close only as professional military liaisons. Liaisons. Neither one of them had much time for personal life. The lights dimmed at the periphery of the room, signaling that all of the senior officers present gathered together at the main circular table in the middle of the war room. Ripulus Iantide sat down at his assigned seat. Grand Admiral Vin sat next to him as other generals and admirals followed suit. They were seated according to the ranks and importance. Several of the black-suited Imperial sentinels moved closer to the table. One of them was uncomfortably close to Iantide. The sentinel's electropike was within striking distance of his shoulder. Two more Imperial sentinels entered the room, flanking Halistor Grint, the personal spokesperson for the Empress of the Meshchek Empire. The Empress herself, known only as V, was rarely seen even inside of the ziggurat. Rumor had it that she dwelt in the deepest, most secure level under the massive base. She used couriers like Grint to relay her instructions and to receive information from the outside world. Halistor Grint himself was a tall Croatian man with brown and gray stripes along his hide. Not much was known about him, just like the Empress. He wore a black suit, reflective of the armor-clad sentries behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said as he sat down at the shiny black table, "our plans for the last quarter century have finally come to fruition. War is here, just as it always needed to be. Now the corrupt so-called free republics will finally pay for the crimes against the Empress. Will finally pay for the crimes against us. The Empress is eager to hear your reports." The Croatian turned to look at Field Marshal with his scrutinizing gaze. "Field Marshal Iantide, report." The Castellan cleared his throat and stood up before speaking. "Initial reports from the field indicate that Meshchek Empire's land forces have met with little resistance from the forces of Kin, Hohab, and Delton. As anticipated, the Republic forces were not expecting war so soon. Their decades-long drawn-down had made them weak and open to conquest." Grint turned to look at the female Katan next to Iantide. "Grandma Admiral, report. Our ships have set sail to blockade Timon and Grados. We're expecting that Hohab will send out their own fleet to counterattack us. As superior numbers will see to it that we'll win the fight." "General Grant, our forces have successfully launched attacks on the Republic bases of Fort Smith, Hardiz, and Garnock. Our enemy was caught completely unaware and off guard." Grint then looked to the next officer in line. Ripulus Iantide didn't listen as the Croatian male gave his report. It was a typical speech from Major General Grendon, full of farcienage, bravado, and aggression. Iantide rolled his eyes. The Emperor's mouthpiece listened to the other generals and admirals gave their speeches on the early progress since the war began 3 days ago. He came to Major General Brock, a Croatian man with an eye patch over his left eye. Brock began, Our forces are sweeping up to the oil fields of Hohab. Here's my 3-pronged attack plan. We will plan over 20% of the nation's resources before the day is out. Things are going according to my plan. Hallister Grint seemed to regard him from down the table. He didn't speak for a long moment. According to your plan? Grok looked back at him in puzzlement. Was treason and embezzlement a part of your plan? Wait, this is a different guy. Was treason and embezzlement a part of your plan? Grint continued. The Empress knows what you've been doing, Grok. This organization relies on the absolute integrity of its members. You've already been paid handsomely for your years of military service. Was that not enough? What? Grok said, his good eye darting back and forth. Enough! You've been stealing from the Army's coffers, costing them precious resources. We've been watching you, Grok. This is not acceptable behavior. Grok stiffened in his chair. He started to breathe heavily. His clawed hands tightly gripped the armrests. The mouthpiece stood up from his chair, and Grok turned to move. He was stopped by a pair of long electropikes that shot in and hovered just inches from his throat and shoulders. Two of the Imperial Sentinels behind him had moved almost faster than he could see. No! He said as he looked at the electric weapons poised dangerously close to him. He could hear the trademark low buzzing sounds coming from the sharp electrode tips. He gulped. Did you find out using crystal bloods? No, we use accountants. The Crochin at the head of the table said with a smirk. His expression then melted away into a scowl. Now you face penalty for your treachery! No! Grok screamed. You can't do that! I had over 17 years of faithful service to the Empire! And yet you ruined it all with your lapse of judgment, Grint growled. Rippleless Eintide, sitting not far enough away from Grok, beheld the action going on. He tried to sink back deeper into his chair, as did many of the other officers around the table. On cue from the mouthpiece, the two sentinels flanking Grok quickly struck with their electropikes. Grok screamed as painful electricity flowed through his body with an audible crackle. Both of his shoulders were impaled on the tips of the pikes. Yellow blood flowed out to stain his uniform. The cracking stopped briefly, and Grok tried to catch his breath through pained gasps. The guards pulled their pikes out of the wounds and struck again, this time hitting him in the upper chest. He screamed loudly as more voltage surged through his body. The sentinel to his right ripped the pike out of the bloody hole and whipped it horizontally, hitting the Crochin in the chest and knocking him and the chair over. The Major General tumbled to the ground and rolled limply. The two sentinels followed him while the others around the table stood still. Please, no more. Please, no more. He tried to crawl on his hands and knees, but the electricity had rendered his limbs virtually useless. He collapsed on his face. The sentinels flipped their pikes upwards, rotated them in their hands, and brought them downward into the flesh of Grok's back. He screamed again as the lances punctured the back of his ribs. The guards, merely toying with him at this point, began to repeatedly stab and shock him again and again. The shocks were of an incredibly high voltage to cause pain, but of a low amperage in order to not cause death. After several more bloody moments, they stopped and pulled their still buzzing pikes out of the Crotation's back. Curled up in a ball, Grok gasped and whimpered through the pain. The sentinels exchanged a look through their masks and struck again. This time they had cranked the amperage on their pikes. The electricity crackling was much louder this time. With one final scream, Grok's body went still. Everyone in the room was silent for a long moment. Eintide and the other officers caught their breath. Grok's twisted body lay there in a heap. Blood seeped out from his numerous wounds and began to pool around him. That bright yellow stood in stark contrast to the shiny black floor. Hallister Grint hissed.
This is what happens when you betray the Confederate alliance.
He looked toward the rest of the military officials sitting nervously around the table. His gaze turned to the Norvetian man sitting next to where Grok had sat just moments before. Admiral
Correndo, your report.
Whew. Oh, wow, that guy's dead. We just saw a murder of a dude. A mean-looking Catan male walked past two Confederate Alliance guards in the camp. He hated meeting out in the field like this. He was much more comfortable in a normal, civilized city environment. Now he was in the jungles of Equatorial Sonolia, sweating to death. Although it was hot, he wouldn't take off his trademark long gray coat and his brown tri-corner hat. It was part of his signature look, just like the twin silver-plated bow-heart pistols he carried on his hips. The silver guns had long barrels and a bulb-like extension at the back where the semi-automatic mechanism was housed. The grips were angled back more than that of a normal pistol. They were one of the earliest semi-automatic designs, dating back over a century ago. The Catan walked past another pair of guards before entering a simple tent. The Confederate officer there looked up from his desk to see who it was. His dark green uniform was adorned with a star on each shoulder. You're late! Wait, you're late. Pardon me, Brigadier General, the Catan said, taking off his hat in a respectful salute. I had an inferno of a time getting through this accursed jungle. The Norvetian officer stood up and shook hands with the Catan. I guess this Flint. Your reputation precedes you. The Catan had a smirk at that remark. He put his hat back on his head. Enough small talk. What's the job this time? You know that officially the country of Gazwaki is not part of the Free Republics, which makes them technically neutral in this conflict. Uh-huh. Well, Senator Benji had been saying some pretty unflattering things about King Barthos. We would like for you to change his mind. Silence him? Permanently, the Norvetian replied. May I ask why? Why do you want to assassinate a senator from a neutral government that has nothing to do with this war? Why not take out the Prime Minister or the Secretary of War? That is none of your concern, Augustus. Fine. How much are we talking about? We're prepared to offer you 20,000 gold credits, said the Brigadier General. Not bad. When do you want me to do it? He's giving a speech in 2 days. Time in the capital. If he follows his usual routine, he'll be outside in the People's Auditorium. So it's a sniper job, eh? Yes. I'm afraid your little silver antiques will be useless. Augustus Flint patted the pistols and their holsters. He loved his Bohart pistols, though obsolete and antiquated for nearly a century. There was nothing else like the feel of them. His tri-corner hat as well as an antiquated fashion item. Augustus had a fascination with antique firearms and their history. You'll just give me half of those credits right now. You'll just give me half of those credits right now and I'll be on my way. The Brigadier General sighed. Fine, he said. He reached behind his desk and Augustus instinctively put his hands near the pistols. He was a quick-draw master. The Norvestian returned with a briefcase. He presented it to the Catan, who opened it. Inside were dozens of gold chips worth thousands of credits. Augustus took the briefcase. A pleasure doing business with you. Just make sure you get the job done, or by the guys, I'll have the half of the Confederate army on your tail. Holy shit, how many fucking pages do we got on this chapter? Huh. 1, 2, 3, Okay. Almost done with this chapter. We got a few more pages on this. Alright, how long do we have? I have a premiere at 7. No, that's the goal. Uh. 2 days later, Augustus Flint was setting up his little sniper nest several hundred yards away from the People's Auditorium. It was a hot, muggy evening. He was inside an old, dark, abandoned apartment complex that was considered a blight on the city. It should have been demolished and rebuilt years ago, but the politicians of Guzwaki had other things to spend money on. The apartment smelled terrible. It was a sickening scent his nose couldn't fight place. Looking out the window, he could see that the auditorium was already lit up and a sizable crowd of people had gathered. Augustus smiled as he readied his GBHJ-3T sniper rifle. It was a beautiful gun, with an orange wood stock, foregrip, and pistol grip set against black metal. He stuck a 5-round clip in the bottom and worked the bolt action. The J3T fired the .35 caliber rifle round. Slightly bigger and more powerful than the regular rifle bullet, the rounds had incredible range and accuracy. He put the bipod down on the open windowsill and looked out through the adjustable scope, which was about half as long as the rifle's barrel. He could clearly see the crowd, the security officers, and the podium. In just a few minutes, Prime Minister Hubnik would appear and give his speech. Senator Benji would be seated nearby. Augustus turned on a small radio he had near him and turned the dial into the news station. As he listened to the news report, he adjusted the optics on his scope. Turning a dial, he moved another glass lens into place to increase the magnification. It wasn't a long wait before Prime Minister Hubnik appeared to the crowd's applause. Despite a scandal or two, he still has a popular following. The older Khatan man in an expensive suit walked to the podium, waving to the crowd. The cadre of politicians followed him onto the stage and sat in chairs near him. Senator Benji was there just to the Prime Minister's side. Augustus readied his rifle and waited. He listened to the radio's live broadcast of the speech. Ladies and gentlemen of Guzwaki, what the Confederate Alliance has done is criminal. They have suddenly and violently attacked peaceful, free Republic territories in an unprovoked manner. By now, you've all heard the stories over these past few weeks. Morgopolis was blockaded by dreadnoughts. Jazwinia was invaded. Horden was invaded. The naval port of Silbiz was attacked. All over the world, the Confederate alliances attacked their neighboring countries. King Barathos has already begun committing war crimes against our neighbor Sin. This is an outrage that cannot stand. Oops. Oh, you're hooked. Nice. I'm glad you're enjoying it. This is fun. Augustus rolled his blood-yellow eyes at the typical speech. He heard enough of them to make him sick. He tuned out the rest of the man's talk as he further adjusted the scope on his intended target. There was a slight breeze, and he had to compensate for bullet drop. He licked his lips as he positioned the crosshairs over the Norvescuan senator. He gently squeezed the trigger. The bullet whizzed through the air and caught Benji in the upper chest near his heart just a moment later. His jacket was suddenly stained by a burst of yellow. Another splash of yellow erupted out of his back. Hubnik jumped as the report of the rifle reached him a moment later. It took another moment or two for the audience to realize what had just happened. The senator fell out of his chair onto his face, leaking more yellow fluid from his wounds. Security personnel rushed to shield the Prime Minister while the others attended to fallen Benji. Hubnik and the other politicians scrambled to get off the stage while the crowd began to disperse in panic. Augustus could hear the screaming via the radio as the reporters tried to describe what had just happened. No one would know where the shot had been fired from. He had plenty of time to escape his nest before any police would come searching the apartment. He packed up his rifle, gathered up his thing, and walked calmly down the stairs. Once he had reached the basement, he opened an old door which led to a tunnel system that lay beneath the city. He had picked this apartment specifically for his access to his city tunnels. In a few moments, he and any trace of him were gone. Up near the North Pole, on the continent of Telonga, Telongia, the frigid nation of Tychos sat. Having long been the world's leading industrial superpower, Tychos had been one of the initial 3 nations to form the Confederate Alliance. The mineral wealth had been heavily exploited for the massive manufacturing facilities that dotted the countryside. Tychos was the most heavily polluted nation on planet Juro. The atmosphere was a constant blowing mixture of snow and ash from heavy industrial smokestacks. Mountains were stripped down, and massive open pit mines were dug in order to extract mine ore. One large body of water, Slag Lake, was a sickening junkyard for industrial waste, chemicals, and useless bodies. Virtually everyone in the country was made to work within the dirty factories. Practically everything that could be manufactured was made there. Before the war, it seemed that no one had any qualms about purchasing Tycho's goods, even though the factory workers were little more than slaves. It proved the principle that cheap material goods were worth more than Anthro's lives, even among the so-called free republics, who were big buyers. Tychos was perhaps most famous for churning out armaments, big and small, from its numerous facilities. The coastal shipyards were notable for how many massive warships could be constructed at a time. Here, collectivism was demonstrated in its most extreme degree. The people had little more than massive blocks of communal housing projects. Individual possessions were scarce. Anything of value was controlled by the massive bureaucracy. Since there was no viable farmland, all food and grain had to be imported from their Confederate ally, Welshire, down to the southeast. As such, the people were on the brink of starvation. Still, they toiled away in the warm but dangerous factories. The factories and apartments were at least refuges from the always frozen landscape and the predatory Malgores that had always managed to survive in the toxic countryside. It was said that the ultra-industrialized Tychos sported more factories than trees. Some estimates say that they alone produced nearly 50% of all manufactured goods in the world. The countryside also had the largest number of railroad tracks per square mile in order to ship the goods to the port cities for exporting. Since the war began about a month ago, many free republic nations had placed embargoes on Tycho's produced products. The economic impact of such protests was negligible. The government had plenty of wealth, and it was all being bent upon the manufacture of superweapons like dreadnoughts and destroyers. Soon enough, all of it would be sent southward into battle, all of it for the glory of the Confederacy. The second Pax Morgantia was well and truly dead. Queen Talshir III, a middle-aged Khatan, paced back and forth endlessly through her royal palace's hallways, pondering. It was late at night. The queen had found herself staying up very late since the war first began over a month ago. Pax Morgantia, the Morganthian peace, was a century-long period of relative stability between World War V and World War VI. Since the end of the Sixth World War, some politicians have talked about a new era of Pax Morgantia, but after just 23 years, that too had come to an end. Truthfully, it was never completely peaceful, even during the first Pax Morgantia. Regional wars and colonial battles had been fought, but the Morgantian Empire itself had never faced an existential crisis. Now it faced one the likes of which it had never seen before. The sheer scale of this war surpassed all of the previous world wars. The Confederate alliance, with 10 belligerent nations, was going up against the rest of the world. As of right now, they were winning. The Queen passed by painted portraits of past monarchs without paying them any mind. The splendid carpeting, drapery, tapestries, and vases were unnoticed by her as well. All she had on her mind were the ongoing battles against the Confederacy. The Morgonian Empire was the last of the 3 golden empires still standing. The Empire of Sin had collapsed 4,500 years ago, and the Empire of Roanoke was a mere shadow of what it used to be. It had suffered greatly during World War V and had lost most of its colonies and prestige. Morgania remained the victor in the great golden struggles, but that could change. That all could change now. All that could change now. Fun and glory. Whew. Oh, you feel like you learned something today? Hell yeah. The more you know, the more you learn. That's what I say. The more you know. That meme. With the rainbow and the star, whatever. Queen Talshir III had begun to reign after her mother had died in the years following World War VI. With the second Pax Morgantia, there were relatively few challenges for her to deal with. Economic difficulties at home and managing the vast empires were stressful, but they were nothing compared to this. The very survival of the entire Morganian Empire was at stake. The naval shelling of Vintron had officially signaled the start of the war. Since then, parts of her home country were occupied by the powerful forces of Tychos. Various colonies and satellite nations were also under attack by the Confederates. The short-furred Khitan woman eventually made her way down the lavish corridors towards the situation area. The armed guards stopped to salute her before letting her inside. Though it was late at night, the situation area never slept. Numerous maps were set up on the wood-paneled walls and tables. Various markings denoted where friendly and enemy forces were deployed around the world. Officers stopped what they were doing in order to salute their queen. As you were, she said. She walked past the tabletop maps, looking at the position of the enemies. A Norwegian general walked up to her, saluted quickly, and said, "My queen, the forces of Confederate Tychos continue to bombard our shores and push inward toward Falmouth. If that city falls, the rest of the High Plains region will fall under enemy control." "We can't let that happen, General Fisher," she responded. "Our forces must hold Falmouth at all costs." The Norwegian general nodded sadly, knowing that scores of men and women would be sent to their deaths trying to keep control of the important city. His own daughter was a gun loader in the Shannon Foxter medium tank. He silently wondered how long it would be until he received the notice of her death. A shaved Khitan admiral came up to the queen as well. "My queen, our naval forces are constantly being harassed by the pirate forces of Gallus Pen as soon as they leave our shores. We must declare war on Vados in order to stop them." The queen regarded the female admiral. "Vados has enough problems without us declaring war on them. Gallus Pen is a monster, but it is up to the people of Vados to stop them themselves. But our ships! We will deal with them. We will deal with those pirates when we can encounter them," the queen said. "We can't simply go out looking for trouble. Believe me, we will deal with Penn's pirates in time. But our first priority is the Tychos Navy. That is the greater threat to our civilization and way of life." "Yes, queen," the admiral said. The queen sighed. Her mother had dealt with all of the rigors of commanding forces in World War VI, but that war was much smaller on the order of magnitude and scope. Of all the wars in the past, World War VII was perhaps the first true world war. It seemed that there wasn't a country on planet Georth that wasn't involved in some way. Certainly, parts of the Morganian Empire stretched across the globe, and each one of them was either in combat with Confederate forces or engaged in helping the war effort. The very fact that there were 10 aggressive nations in the Confederate alliance was unprecedented in history. Queen Talshir's mother never had to deal with anything that terrible. And that's the end of chapter 3. I'm going to read more of this book. This is chapter 4. I'm going to read more of this book later. I do hope to catch you later, and I hope to catch you at my 7 p.m. ET premiere of Star Trek. Yeah, Star Trek episode. 7 p.m. ET. When is that? That's in, 10 minutes?
Yeah, you're doing more reading right after, though, right?
I want to make
tonight,
food.
Or do you want to do it tomorrow?
I want to do it tomorrow during the day. I like the daytime kind of vibe.
Okay.
Because I want to eat food after this. And it hurts my throat talking this long. So I'll continue this.
I just wish you had found out like 3 weeks ago that you couldn't do it in one day, and then you didn't put it the last 3 days of the month.
Oops. Anyway.
True. Oops is
Oops.
true.
Well, I hope to see you at my live premiere, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow for more reading. 3 or 4 more chapters. I'm going to try to start earlier so I can get more chapters in before the premiere. But
The guy who sent it to you works at night, though.
the guy who's, yeah.
So he's never going to get to watch this? He's always going to be asleep when you read it? Just take consideration, perhaps.
I guess that is in consideration. On one hand, my throat is talking for this long. How do people do it? How do you talk for 2.5 hours straight? It's hard. In practice, I can return later tonight and read this, and also return tomorrow.
If you did like cause you don't have to do a 12-hour thing. You can do
Yeah.
like 3 hours or 2 hours, and then like take a 2-hour break
Yeah,
and do another 2 hours.
yeah.
You want it to be episodic, like when you're doing a video game Let's Plays.
Yeah. So I'm gonna return later tonight.
I
to
love
read more of
helping
this.
you plan the content live.
Yay! So come catch my live premiere.
I definitely want you to come make food.
I'm gonna make food, and I'm gonna return back later tonight. I'm gonna read more chapters of this. So I hope to come. Hope that you can come by. If you're enthralled in this story,
Make a playlist out of it.
I'll make a whole playlist out of this so you can listen.
Then salad story time, and then you can put each.
Thanks for the adventure you took us on. You're welcome, and I will take you on this adventure later tonight. I hope to see you then. Adios. Bye-bye.